All right, here we go again. Another weekly Sheep Farm podcast. This is episode 213. Why have I got 202 written here? These numbers are doing my head in. They're frying my head.
I write it down every week, so it is 213.
The matrix is frying my head. The zeros and ones. The format is simple, although some people choose to ignore it. We will try to release a minimum of 4 shows a month. Members get a full podcast and a download. Non-members get part 1. All new shows are released on Saturdays. They're released on Saturdays. All new shows released Saturdays. Always at sheepfarm.co.uk, and we also release them at Podomatic. And occasionally, like this one, they'll go on YouTube as well if we feel that they're YouTube friendly. But all podcasts are always on sheepfarm.co.uk. Even part 1 and part 2, or the full one, should I say, is always there for members as well. Podomatic ship them out to Spotify, Amazon, Audible, Google, Apple, and a few others as well. I think there's about 15 other podcast hosting platforms that they ship them out to. Somebody asked about a Matrix video. They're all on YouTube. The latest ones are on YouTube. So there you go, if you're listening to this now. Please subscribe to the website for email notifications, which I'm going to talk about in a second, for new shows and other information that we've got going on as well. You can join my rather balding Adidas 3 Strands brother on Instagram as well.
No need for that, is there?
We're only 2 minutes in.
Yeah, I generally reply to most Instagram messages. I've been a bit slack this last couple of weeks because I was a bit poorly and a bit busy.
Yeah, all I'm hearing is excuses for losers.
Usually delve in it once a day.
What were it? Coffees for closers. Is that
Glenn Ross?
Yeah,
Classic film.
Yeah, classic.
Talking about films quickly, in fact, before I forget, you know that one we both mentioned. I mentioned it when I read it in Empire, and you mentioned it the other week. That one about that transgender mafia, Mexican mafia thing.
Yeah.
So I was looking at a thing about it today. It's got slated, right, by most critics. It's got about 70% on Rotten Tomatoes. Slated by all the viewers.
That's because all the critics and viewers are transphobic.
But it's got nominated for 13 Oscars. I think it was 12 or 13, which is as many as any film ever.
But why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you?
It might be a fantastic film.
It might be a fantastic film.
But it's a musical about a transgender Mexican gangster.
It doesn't sound that interesting.
It sounds like a parody, doesn't it? It sounds like a parody. Something like a comedy.
Also, like the Star Wars films have all been criticised and people are slagging them off and stuff like that. So let's just put them through to nominate them for every Oscar going.
But it's got nominated for more Oscars than Gone with the Wind, or as many, which I think that was the high. I think that was the highest.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe it's the best film ever.
Same amount of dresses.
Maybe it's the best film ever, but I would highly, highly doubt it, wouldn't you?
Yes, I'd say it's going to be shite.
And the Mexican people are up in arms, right? Because he said it's portraying Mexicans in like a ridiculous.
Trannies.
Yeah, well, just in a ridiculous.
Isn't it weird? Mexican
sense.
gang lord Tranny has just films come out that's been nominated for all the Oscars when Trump's got in and he's kicking Mexicans out back over the border and is doing away with trannies.
Well, I don't think there's any.
Do you think that's a coincidence?
I don't think there's any coincidence when films come out. I think the planning must be pretty meticulous, but they seem to drift out at the right time, don't they?
Yes.
Just to cause a stir and an uproar. But yeah, I mean, well, it just shows you that it's rigged, doesn't it? It just shows you everything's rigged.
Yes.
I mean, the Oscars are obviously rigged. Otherwise, why would, except for that slap in the face, who's got that one rigged? That were real.
That were a real punch, that, Chris.
That were a real
Chris
punch,
Rock, yeah.
Chris Rock, yeah.
Took
it like a rock.
Yeah. I think if I had slapped him on face, he'd probably gone down.
Well, you would think Will Smith would have knocked him out, wouldn't you?
Not with those sugar puff fingers. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if you saw that stuff as well, just quickly, about... is this the intro?
Yes, this is the intro, Chris. Wake up.
Are we adding something at the end?
Wake up, smell the coffee. Coffee's for closers.
Are we adding something at the end, or are we doing it right now?
We're adding what we're talking about in part 2.
All right.
You get the general gist. I mean, you know that intro that I've just read out there?
I know, I forgot.
I
forgot what we were doing.
It's a bit like, just have another gargle of coffee there, right? And
I've been in my shed painting teeth all morning. I go a bit gaga.
What's that? Get with the programme, motherfucker. Yeah.
That's where I think we're in YouTube.
Oh, yeah, I know, yeah. Kids are listening. It's after Threshold anyway. If you're wondering why Chris his dulcet tones sound fantastic, he's got a new computer.
At last. Yeah.
I should have a button here with a crowd cheering.
Well, I decided to get rid of my 9-year-old laptop. I was going to crack down in front of it because I thought we're doing a few of these now, so I might as well update.
Yeah, we're only 200 plus in. I've only been nagging you for 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, I thought I'd get rid of it when smoke started coming out back.
Yeah, but yeah, so we hopefully got the audio sorted. Although the audio were better this week in the recording.
Yeah, but you can't trust it, can you?
No.
Well, to be fair, a few people mentioned it, and they're right to mention that the mic was bad. So it was my computer. I think it was old.
Yeah,
very out of date. So I've treated myself to a brand new computer.
Like you, really?
Yeah,
out of date, and me. We're both out of date now. We're
both the only downside is I've got a screen now. Like your head's bigger,
right?
So I can see more of your face, which is slightly more disturbing than through my knackered old screen.
Yeah, your camera's working better as well.
You're in full on 4K.
Yeah, 4K in hell.
Instead of it looked like you're on VHS, an old knackered VHS before.
Yeah. It looked like when you were watching Chris, it looked like you were looking through one of them old 80s CCTV on Cook Report. But yeah, so hopefully we've got that part solved now, and I've had to answer 5 years worth of emails from people saying sounds crap. We've got there in the end, kicking and screaming. Yeah, and it looks a lot better. Last week's upload, I uploaded the wrong one onto Podomatic last week. I have done it before.
Nobody mentioned.
No, nobody said about it. One person, I don't know if they were having a bad day, but certainly lost the plot. I don't know what they got with.
I suppose that's a bit of a compliment, really. That means they missed the one to see the show.
Well, that's what they actually said there, Yeah. But apparently, I were being. I don't know. I can't remember now. It went from me uploading the wrong one to
personal insults.
A personal insult. Like, what? Where did that come from? We're not that spectacular.
No. We've done 200. We're still new at this, aren't we? Let's be honest.
But do you know what? I've got a million things going. You've got plates spinning all over the place. You're painting teeth. I'm doing other stuff. Yeah. And you put these uploads on sometimes. You choose wrong one from wrong file.
You've done it.
I sent you a list of the jobs that need doing when you're loading stuff on. There's about 30 jobs that need doing. I am going to forget about one. Also, that day, I had the worst. Sometimes Lyme comes back and whacks me around the head. And that day, I had the worst headache. And this guy's emailing me saying blah, blah. I'm thinking, do you know what? I just want to drive to his house.
Well, talk about Sky. The other day, I was in the house. It was like 9:30, 10 o'clock. I got a knock at the door. What the hell is that? Next door neighbour says, you left your car door open. I looked out, car door just wide open.
Right.
Shopping out back. Yeah. I just left it open.
Left all that gold bullion and deeds for house and stuff like that on back seat.
Yeah. Someone could have nicked my Kia Sportage.
I always think of that conversation we had with Master Lee.
I know.
Fantastic. Decent? No, we're in Chris's. Fucking here,
That was 4 years ago. Still got the same car.
What else have I got to say? Oh, somebody mentioned on an email. I mentioned it in this part in the intro. This is the intro, by the way, of 213. If you're listening, I mentioned a herb the other day that's good for prostate, which is it's called saw palmetto. And yeah, we're in the process of manufacturing it. I tell you what it does. What it's helped me with is it stopped me getting up at night to go to the toilet.
Right.
So that's the most noticeable thing that it's done. Yeah. Obviously, when you get to a certain age, like us old crusties, people get up in the middle of the night, and it noticeably stopped me within about a week. Now, I use a particular product. I'm not saying everyone's the same, but yeah. So
I've never heard of that one.
Well, you'll be having some because I'm in the process of manufacturing it with a mate of mine who's a 4th generation herbalist.
Do you want to mention Seb in this first bit before we go into the second bit?
You mention it now, yeah.
I think you should. I'm not trying to sell Dom's vitamins here, but
can I say something? I don't just sell vitamins.
Well, you know what I'm saying. What do they call it?
It's a herb, is this? Mimosa pudica.
I can never say it. I've tried it. He didn't do this for me. But I said, my son who does the theme tune to this, sings the theme tune. He
read the theme tune, sing the theme tune.
He's done a new version of it. Actually, he's working on a new version of it. It sounds wicked because he's at music college. He's just trying to. He's just doing a new. He was up here a couple of days ago, yesterday and the day before, and he let me listen to a draft of his new version of the Sheep Farm song. It sounds wicked. He's put guitars in it and everything because he's just got himself an electric guitar. Anyway, Dom sent him a box of potions down, and the minutia. And he's been having this problem for about a year and a half, I reckon, where he was having like these panic attacks, and I was really worried.
And he were also going dizzy, wasn't he?
No, hang on a minute. Yeah. He were getting palpitations, and he was having to lie down, and he was losing his breath. And he's gone on for like a year and a half, I think. And I was worried. No, longer than that. It's like 2 years, 3 years.
2 years, yeah.
Because I was worried that he'd had the tap, and he was having me on because I know his girlfriend at the time had. So I was worried he'd had it just to keep everyone sweet because that's the kind of guy he is. And he told me he hadn't, but I thought he's not going to tell me, is it? And I made him promise me he hadn't. And
he's from Croydon.
Yeah, exactly. He's got that South London.
They can't lie straight in bed.
Like my missus. For some reason, little lies are all right. Anyway, he assured me he hadn't, and he continued having these things. He went to doctors. He was quite worried about. I was quite worried about him. He stopped drinking coffee. He's fairly healthy. He's vegan. He's in and out. Well, that
doesn't mean say you're healthy because you're vegan.
No, but what I mean is, he cooks. So he cooks bowls of fresh veg. He literally eats like a bloody. I've seen him cook. He's a good cook. He cooks bowls of fresh veg.
Yeah.
He can literally live off that, lentils and Anyway. So he was cutting things out of his diet. He stopped drinking coffee and alcohol and everything, and sweet and sugar, and nothing would do it. Anyway, Dom sent him these potions down. He tried the Minusa.
No,
and I think
it's not.
I can't say it.
It's Mimosa Pudica.
Mimosa Pudica. All right. He tried the Mimosa, and I think it was 2 days, and he said he literally passed out, and then he shat out a 2-foot worm.
When he said passed out, he didn't pass out because
he fainted. Herbs. No, not because of the herbs. He kind of fainted. Not when he passed the thing, but he had like a bit of an incident. But he said it was kind of almost spiritual. He's a very spiritual kind of character, if you ever meet him. But he said he kind of flaked out, and he passed out this 2 foot. He told me, he said he passed out this worm, and I said, how long were it? He said 2 foot.
Mm. Well, when you, I mean, I've got
to
say.
It was like a spiritual split. The way he described it to me, Fatty, was he said, and he talks a bit like me, but he said he was like he'd been split in half. He said it was like his good side and his bad side had split in half, and he was shedding the bad side.
Mm. Well,
and he even said he had flashback. I mean, he's a bit arty-fatty, limp-wristed like me, but he said he had flashbacks of different points of where he cuddled this like cat, and he reckons he got it from this cat. And it was like a few years ago. And he said he had all these like weird flashbacks. He even said he went into a shop thinking back about it, and this voice in his head was telling him to buy bread and booze and sugar. And he had flashbacks of that.
Chris, what were I saying to you about noise in your head?
Yeah, well, that's what I was telling him. Yeah, about that noise in your head.
Also,
but he didn't realise until it had gone.
The dizzy spells, more or less the nausea, nearly passing out, and all these. I remember falling up the stairs here at home with a cup of tea in my hand, and a clue, tea all over in wall, blah blah, and all sorts of stuff happening like that. But when you pass these things, I've mentioned before, it's like the screaming. It's like they can hear a frequency.
He said that as well. It was.
Not so much now. I mean, I've literally passed hundreds of these things. I don't know whether I were bad with them, my wife has this as well, or whether we're middle at road, or everybody's same, or just for some reason, because of how we're living, we can detox all these things out. However, all the symptoms that you're saying there, that's what we have.
Yeah. He thought it was because he lived in a flat for a while, and he found some mold, and he moved out. And he thought he got something from mold or something because it can be a similar.
It could be all
reaction.
of the above. That don't mean to say that he's not still got that.
Well, I put money on it with that 2 foot worm. To be honest with you.
Well, no, I'd say part of it. I mean, the thing is, when these things come out, obviously they don't want to come out.
Yeah,
they don't want to.
He said also, I forgot to tell you. He said also, he could feel them he could feel it.
You can, yeah. You can feel them. Because I mean, that were probably in his intestine because it happened quite quick. He took it, and then 3 hours later he passed it, or whatever, 5 hours later, which is unusual. So that stuff had got into his system, paralyze this parasite and it'd come out, right? So that's unusual. I don't hear stuff. Normally it's a couple of days or something like that, but he was obviously ready to get rid of this thing and it were hanging on in there. But it were 2 foot long. I mean, I've got pictures of some of the stuff that and people have sent me pictures of their stuff nicely here.
Good little correspondence you got going on there.
One guy took a vase, my mate up here, and somebody else has said they've done this to the doctors, and the doctor just said, "Oh, it's your stomach lining that."
He's a woman, wasn't it, who listened to us?
No, one of my mates.
Right.
He did it 3 years ago. In fact, longer, before we started the podcast.
I've tried the mimos. I didn't pass any snakes out, I don't think.
Yeah. I'm not saying everybody does, and I'm not saying everybody struggles with them. But anyway, it's a fascinating subject. I would say most illnesses, and a lot of people will argue with me and say germ versus terrain theory. All I can say is I stopped having all that noise in my head and all that anxiety when these things started coming out. But they don't want to come out. You got gut rot. You got all sorts of other crap coming out with it.
He said after it, he slept for 12 hours.
You feel lighter, enlightened, whatever you want to call it. It's a weird sensation. It is. Someone else has asked as well. I'm going to get on because we've been on 16 minutes, so we need to get on to part 2. We haven't even introduced the guest yet. But someone also asked about sell-by dates on products. They've always got 2 years. They've got about 2 years on of products, roughly. But the powders, I mean, I've got products from other companies that I'll take after the sell-by date because they're chuffing powders.
It's like dried herbs, isn't it? It's like dried herbs.
They're dried herbs. I mean, as long as they're not immersed in water or something like that, most stuff should be okay. But anyway, I'm not even talking about our stuff there.
You've got to, it's like when from supermarket, they've got to put dates on stuff, haven't they?
Yeah. I'm just testing out some new magnesium, actually. 2 lots of new magnesium. One a liposomal one, but also a flavoured one for kids and adults. But also, I'm upgrading the capsules, the Mega Mags. There's enough room to add another 100 milligrams of magnesium in there. So I'm supercharging them. But, yeah. Anyway. Okay, hope I answered that. We're going to... Our guest today is Mike Williams from Sage of Quay. And we had... on Tuesday night, we had a fantastic conversation on Tuesday night with Mike.
The legend, Mike. The legend,
the legend in his own lifetime, Mike Williams.
I felt slightly starstruck.
Did you?
I've listened to him forever.
Yeah, I know you have.
Decade. Yeah. It was good. Really nice chat, wasn't it? Really good. I forgot to ask him. We'll have to get him. I'm sure hopefully he'll come on again. But I forgot to ask him about Jordan Maxwell because he's put a lot of his videos out, just his opinion on him and stuff. Because strange character, Jordan Maxwell, but says some fantastic stuff, didn't he?
He did.
Rest in peace, because he's passed away.
R.I.P. Jordan. So, I hope you enjoy this. This is going out on YouTube. We're going to put it on. I did a lot of editing on this to get rid of some of the stuff, because we talked about quite a lot of stuff. It weren't just about the Beatles stuff. Mike's not just about Beatles. That's something he's sort of fallen into, and the research just keeps going, just like a lot of my stuff. It just keeps dragging him back in.
I think he gives his opinion on Trump and the elections and all that nonsense.
And all the stuff going in 9/11 and things like that. And, he's a fascinating guy, and he's got a good intellect, and he's just an all-round nice bloke.
We were doing an hour and a half, it turned into 2 hours.
Yeah, I said to him when he came on, I said, how long should we do? How long you got? And he went, about an hour 20, something like that. My wife's coming back. If you get dogs barking and lead walking and all this type of stuff, we ended up doing 2 hours, I think about 2 hours, 10 minutes, something like that. So anyway, this will be on the premiere you'll be listening to this now on the premiere anyway. Okay.
Just make sure you upload right one, you daft twat.
Yeah, I know. I said to that guy who emailed in, I'm going to be whipping myself with stinging nettles for my insubordination. How dare I? Load the wrong ones. Anyway, thank you for tuning in. If you're going to join us in part 2, we'll see you there. If not, we'll see you next week. Bye. All right, welcome to this new podcast. This is episode 213, and today we've got with us, joining us, Mike Williams from Sage of Quay. Hi, Mike.
Hi, Dom. Hi, Chris.
Hi, Mike. Great to see you, mate.
We've wanted Mike on for a long, long time. I suppose a lot of people who have been listening to the PID phenomenon want to hear the stories, really, because it's been going on for quite a while, probably since the late 60s, I believe. And Mike's sort of one of the main dare I say, protagonist, Mike. but not necessarily in a bad way, but more the one that's waving the flag for it. You've put yourself out there with this information, really, haven't you?
Yeah, I became the Paul is dead guy, which is something that I really wasn't looking to be. Just quickly, my first interview on the topic goes back to September of 2016 with Sophia Smallstorm.
I
And
remember it, mate.
and I didn't plan on doing anything beyond that. What happened was I told her I was reading this book. It's the memoirs of Billy Shears. And every once in a while, Sophia and I would catch up on Skype and have a discussion. And I was telling her a little bit about the book. And then she said, "Oh, you should come on my podcast and talk about it." And I was really leery about it because the book is 666 pages, 66 chapters. And I was concerned about how do you boil all of this down? How do you consolidate it and talk about it and make sense in 2 hours? So for months, I just kept putting it off and putting it off, thinking and hoping that she would just forget about it. And, Sophia being Sophia, she did not forget about it. So finally, I said, okay, I'll do it. So I sat down, I put together this huge PowerPoint presentation. It took me quite a while to put together. And that was my first show. And at the time, I was very green. I mean, I understood, obviously, the conspiracy, but I did the research for 8 years. I wrapped it up this past November. The ongoing day in and day out research, I'll still do discussions on it. But when I go back to the early stuff, I think to myself, wow, how much it evolved over time, how much more I got into it. And so after Sophia, I actually thought that was going to be the only show. And then Mark Devlin contacted me, and Mark said, "Hey, Mike, could you come on my show and talk about it?" And I said, "Sure." Mark's a friend. And in that show, toward the end of it, I had said that this was going to be the last Paul is Dead interview I was going to do.
Actually,
That was in
remember,
November. That was in November of 2016.
That's how, Mike, just to interrupt, sorry, that's how I introduced you to Dom, because I remember saying, this fella's been doing it, and he said he's not doing another. When was that? 2018?
16.
He's not doing another. Sorry,
2016. That was November of 2016 when I had that conversation with Mark, and
I'm never doing. I'm going to end it here because I don't want to become the Paul is dead guy. I think you said.
Yeah. And here I am.
But it's just I was saying to you off air. I'm not a Beatles fan at all, but I just found it so compelling, and the whole thing. I read the Billy Shears book. I just found it fascinating. I couldn't put it down. And the bit that got me, if you don't know what I'm saying, was that when I was reading, I was on holiday. I took it on holiday with me. I was in Spain, and it said, if you think I'm fibbing or I'm making this up, go and look at a picture of Paul McCartney's son and see if he looks like Billy Shears.
Yes.
And he looks just like him, doesn't he? He doesn't look like Paul McCartney as we know him as he is, but he looks more like
Vivian Stanshall.
William Stanshall, yeah.
The character
Exactly.
Vivian Stanshall, which is a character that Billy created. And there were at least two Vivian Stanshalls. There was the one that played in the Bonzo Dog Band with Neil Innes. That was Billy. And there was another Vivian Stanshall that Billy hired and put on his payroll so that his Paul McCartney character and his Vivian Stanshall character could coexist. And they do not look alike. I have people who want to argue with me, and I say, well, look, all you need to do is take a look at the guy in the Bonzos and the guy that wasn't in the Bonzos. That was Victor. That's the guy that was on the payroll. He's the guy that died in 1995 that you'll find in Wikipedia. And they are clearly not the same person. And so Billy's son, James McCartney, yes, Chris, you're exactly right. He looks just like his father before his father had the plastic surgery and the cosmetics and everything else that went on to make the transformation from Billy, what he used to look like, to looking like or having a strong resemblance to the Paul McCartney character.
That's my go. If I'm trying to explain this Paul McCartney thing to anybody, that's my go-to thing to show them. Look at that and look at that. And most people can't. You can't really dispute that bit, I don't think.
No, what happens is I've done the same thing. When people want to debate it, I said, okay, look, I have a chart that shows Billy, as Stanchel and James McCartney. That's his son. And I'll ask people, take a look at the picture and tell me that that boy doesn't look like that man. And he does.
Mm,
yeah.
Very much like him.
A lot like him, yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, it's not just compelling. It looks like his son.
It looks like his son. Same coloring.
Same eyes.
Same eyes.
As Paul's got older, he's looking more made up, isn't it? More and more, fake head and fake. He just looks a bit more fraudulent than he did even when he was younger.
Yeah, because what's happening is the plastic surgeries and the fillers and all of the stuff that he was doing to create and maintain the McCartney character, it begins to fade over time. And so when you look at him now and you flash back to the Vivian Stanchel character in the 1960s, now you'll start to see that he looks like an older version of himself. He looks a lot less like Paul McCartney, more like Vivian Stanchel now than he did during his prime years. Because during his prime, when he was playing Paul McCartney, there was a lot of work done. There was a lot of surgeries. He was using latex. There were fillers, the whole 9 yards to create that character. And what Tavistock did was to create a composite Paul McCartney. So if you take a look at the different versions of McCartney over the years, let's say going back to 1962, 63, when biological Paul was there, and then you take a look at each subsequent year, let's say take it up through 1980, 1990, you don't even have to go up through current day. And what you'll see is they are not the same person. And in fact, what Tavistock and the control system also did was to employ doubles and lookalikes. So over time, what happened was there were a lot of photographs and images of not only biological Paul, but of doubles and lookalikes and Billy made up as Paul McCartney. So it becomes a composite. So they wanted to create a composite Paul McCartney because this way, to the average person, the fan, the listener, it just becomes a big blur. And nobody's doing any photo comparisons. Nobody's taking a look at Billy in Wings as Paul McCartney and then going back to 1964, 65 to biological Paul and seeing that they have a completely different facial structure, different nose, different jawline. Billy has a higher
guess
forehead.
as well that people in power, Tavistock, the controllers, would know that technology was going to change going forward, and looking back at old pictures would just be as confusing for people. There would be no way you better tell, or the average person would better tell the difference, if you like.
Right. They doctored a lot of images, Dom. Even with rudimentary technology that they had back in the day, I have images where it's very clear where they doctored photographs and created a composite or hybrid image. One in particular is an image that's shown a lot, and you'll see it a lot on the internet, which is Paul McCartney's allegedly back in the Hamburg days. He's much younger. That is a composite or hybrid mock-up of Paul and Billy. And these are the types of things that they have been doing over time. And in fact, a lot of these Paul is Dead forums and communities on Facebook, they continue to do this image comparison stuff. And I stopped doing that a long time ago because I knew that essentially after a while it becomes a waste of time. Because who are you looking at? Are you looking at biological Paul? Are you looking at a double or a lookalike? Or are you looking at
a mosaic of all of them?
A mosaic, a composite.
Yeah.
Exactly. So what happens is you have to get to the point where you just acknowledge that they are two different people, that there are two different people, at least two different people, and then move forward from there. And then what I did was to get into the bigger picture of what the Beatles were all about. It's not just about the replacement of Paul McCartney. I have explained to my audience and in my presentations that that's a subplot. It really is, because the Beatles were put in play to do a massive amount of social engineering.
In fact, it's a distraction, if you like, isn't it? In a way, because no other band in history has got this much research about it in this way, in this genre of research. The Doors, the Rolling Stones. There is a bit of research. Obviously, you've done a bit on the Rolling Stones and what have you, but not in the depth of what people have done on the Beatles.
No. The Beatles, the whole Beatle psychological operation benefits from all of this because it keeps the Beatles in the spotlight. It keeps the ritual going. There's a occulted
more
ritual
importantly.
aspect of this. Yeah, that is more important. And but there's so much more to it, so much more than just a replacement of Paul. So to me, that piece of it was Paul swapped out. That's an easy answer. Yes, he was back in 1966. Now let's move forward and figure out why all of this was done.
Going back sorry, Chris.
I was just going to say I found this interesting. This was like 2 or 3 days ago. My daughter, who's 6, Mike, came home from school and said, "Dad, have you heard of the Beatles?" I'm like, "Yeah, why?" And she said they were learning about it at school. They were learning about rock music, and they were discussing the Beatles. So they're still keeping that Beatles fire alive to a 6-year-old. I mean, there's so many other musicians they could talk about. They could talk about anybody, but I just found it interesting that must be put into the curriculum to mention the Beatles, even to a 6-year-old.
That's because the Beatles, from a pop music perspective, are foundational to everything that followed.
Mm.
That's why. That's why you'll hear hip hop artists, rap artists, grunge artists, just pick a genre.
Yeah.
Almost always they will pay some tribute to the Beatles. They will credit the Beatles for helping them do what they're doing today. So you can have two completely unrelated genres of music, and they will go back to the Beatles as being an inspiration and a bedrock of what they're doing. And it's supposed to be like that because the Beatles, their job, again, was to social engineer at a worldwide level. They were the first created band with the mission to social engineer at a worldwide level and to help usher in Aleister Crowley's Aeon of Horus, which most people will know as the Age of Aquarius. So moving from the Age of Pisces or the Aeon of Osiris to the Age of Horus or the Age of Aquarius. That was their primary mission, and it was to break down the traditional values, to break down traditional religions, especially Christianity. Christianity was in the crosshairs, according to memoirs. And Chris, I know that you read the book. It tells us very clearly that the Illuminati or the controllers, whatever label you want to give them, declared war on Christianity back on September 11th of 1962. So September 11th is a very important date because the numbers 9 and 11, when they come together, that means that there is a major transformational event that is underway, not even being planned, that it's underway. So think about September 11th of 2001. That was a major transformational event. The world essentially changed with 9/11, 2001.
I noticed, Mike. In fact, I'd like to thank or stroke blame you for getting me into numerology, by the way, because I got into it after listening to you talk about it, I think, some years ago. But did you notice that Trump was a 9/11 president?
Yes.
He's the 45th and the 47th president.
Yes. So Donald Trump is a 9/11 event. So the world, I'm not even going to say just the United States, the world should expect major, major change, major transformation because of him, because he is 9 and 11. As you said, Chris, the 45th and the 47th president. Going back to July of last year when they had the fake assassination attempt, the numbers all around him, there were a number of numbers, but the primary number was the number 7. And the number 7 is very important because it's a number that was also all around the Beatles. And the Beatles albums, when we go from Please Please Me up through Revolver as an example, and even going up into Sergeant Pepper, there were 14 tracks, 7 on side A, 7 on side B. The Beatles were essentially together for 7 years, 1962 through 1969. The number 7 in numerology, especially when we're talking about as it relates to the Kabbalah, represents higher levels of consciousness, a transcendence from the physical world into the non-physical spiritual world, becoming awakened, illuminated, enlightened. And so that number was all around the Beatles, and that number was all around Donald Trump during the Butler PA staged event. Nobody shot at him. There was no, when he went to the Republican convention, he was saying that he was bleeding profusely, and anybody that watched the video footage could see that he was not bleeding profusely. In fact, there was very little blood at all. It was makeup blood. But that number 7 told me that he was going to be selected and placed in the White House for a second term. And I did a video back in July of 2024. In fact, I did 2 videos. In the second one, I explained what his role is going to be this go around, and that he indeed was going to be selected to sit in the White House for a second term.
What did he say was ushering in the golden age?
The golden age, he keeps talking about the golden age. And that goes back to Rome. So, and in particular, what it is, it's basically a poke in the eye. And what they're really referring to is the fall of Rome. So when he talks about the golden age, it's in reference to the fall of Rome. And in fact, remember I don't know if you guys saw this, but the salute that Elon Musk did at the podium, and everybody thought it was
a Nazi sign. It
was a Roman salute, wasn't it?
That's a Roman salute. That's a Roman salute. People kept saying it was the German Nazi salute. It was the Roman salute.
But they were still drawing attention to it, Mike, weren't they? By everybody discussing that it was
the spell is already cast straight away.
Yeah. So Trump's role is going to be to corral all of what the New World Order or the controllers consider to be the outliers, the people that have not bought into the New World Order agenda that the World Economic Forum keeps talking about. By the way, what I try to explain to people is, if you think what I'm telling you is crazy, just go to their website and take a look at what they're publishing. Okay, they're telling you this stuff. So all I'm doing is reading it and then telling you what's on their website. Yeah. And so Trump's quote base are constitutionalists, nationalists, people that believe in personal sovereignty. And his job is going to be to get those people over the goal line, because their trust in him, blind trust, he's going to be the shepherd, and he's going to lead them into the global or the worldwide agenda.
Didn't Crowley have the Golden Dawn as well?
Yes.
No, yeah.
Yes.
And it's weird how he's actually a golden colour, Trump, isn't it? He's been sort of painted gold, that orange colour that he gets, the false tan.
Yeah. He's an orange guy with really blonde hair.
Strange looking character.
Yeah. So that's his job. His job is to, in my opinion, his job is to sweep up and get the resistors to relent and to follow him over the goal line. And we can see this too, like with the announcement of all the work he's doing with AI, artificial intelligence, right? And he has not backed off the
jibbery jabberies. Yeah.
No, he hasn't backed off the shots at all.
No. And in fact, they've actually upped the game now. They've invested $500 billion in AI arm spears to back up what they did in 2020, 2021.
Yeah, think about that.
the jibber jabberers went from 10 years to develop to 1 year, and now it's 48 hours.
Yes, that's a point that I've been talking to people about. So people should think about that. $500 billion is going to be invested, and then they're telling us that the AI is going to be able to do its thing and evaluate your blood, and within 48 hours, it's going to come up with a personalized shot that's going to help you to get rid of cancer.
Yeah.
Right? So everything's about fear. So what's the most fearful thing that most people can think of when they get sick?
Yeah.
You get diagnosed with cancer. So they're playing that card.
All comes down to the test, though, Mike, doesn't it? The test, if that says you've got it, and then you have to have the jibber jab to cure it in 48 hours.
Yeah.
But like the COVID nonsense.
How does AI learn, though, Chris? So how does AI learns from human research, from human science? And so if they're going to tell us that the AI can come up with a cure in 48 hours in 2 days, then that would tell me that they already know the cure to cancer.
Yeah.
Either that, or they are completely bamboozling everybody and they've got nothing. They just want to inject you with a bunch of junk.
Well, the strange thing is, I mean, Larry Ellison, I've mentioned this before, and you probably know this. I mean, he's just CIA written all over him. His business was set up by the intelligence services. So, I mean, to get the contracts he get, the actual name Oracle was from a CIA project.
Yes.
It's just over here we had a TV program running from the ironically beginning in 1964, Mike, called Up. Right, you'll have to excuse our language, our accents. By the way, I know we're a bit broad and we miss letters out and words out, etc. We're from rural England in the north, so we speak very fast, miss words out. So we always apologise to our American guests. Although ironically, we are part American. We've got family in Chicago.
Oh, do you? Okay.
Yeah, the black side of our family, the jazz side, I call it. They're all from Chicago. But anyway, that's another story. So yeah, in 1964, they started a program called Up, which basically followed kids from 7 years old. Every 7 years, they made another program. Every 7 years. So just going back to what you were, it just rung a bell when you mentioned the number 7.
Number 7.
There has to be something in that development stage of children. And they're still doing it now. Some of these guys who are in the 60s and what have you, they're still doing the program. It's interesting. Live, it's like a live program on TV.
Yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, and just a side note there. Sorry to stop it. So what's the number 7? Just recap what it signifies for people.
It signifies transcending from the physical world, where man incarnates as the beast. That's the number 6. And number 7 takes us into higher realms of consciousness. Now, I'm talking with regard to how this occult structure that runs this world, how they think and how they look at it. So from the Jewish Kabbalah, they would say that the number 7 represents perfection of man. So man's perfected reality or perfected environment, however we want to phrase it. The number 8 is God's perfection. So number 7 being below number 8 is man. And since man is not God, they have their own level of perfection, right? Their own, right, rung on the ladder. So the number 7 was all around, like I said, it was all around the Beatles. And that represented the Beatles leading the world to a point of enlightenment and illumination. Now, when I talk about enlightenment and illumination, we're talking about it from the perspective of the controllers. And the world is run by occultists. I've mentioned this many times to my audience, and people really need to start getting their arms around that, because there's so much occultism taking place today. So much. It's every day. Every day. It goes on. So, and again, this transcendence from to an enlightened or illuminated state of being has a basis in Crowley's religion of Thelema. So Crowley taught that the age of Pisces, which was the eon of Osiris, was an age of oppression, where man and woman were shackled and they were governed by rules and by authority, and that they did not pursue their true will. And he taught that once the shift is made to the eon of Horus, now Horus is the savior god from the Egyptian mythology, that man, woman, humanity will be pursuing their true or pure will. So going from a shackled age to an age of being unshackled. The problem with this is that Crowley was not talking to the general public. He was not talking to the world population. He was talking to his elite circle. So he was talking to the elite establishment, which he was completely and totally in bed with. And because I know that sometimes people want to debate me and have an argument and say, no, he's talking about, Crowley was doing good things and it was enlightenment for everybody. I said, I'm sorry. All you need to do is to read his book 77. And he talks about all the things that you should be doing with your will. And at the very end, he says, and the slaves shall serve.
Mm.
And my question is, if the slaves are going to serve, then who are the slaves?
Yeah.
So what they want to do is they want to get to a point where there is going to be a depopulation. And there are many methods in which they go about the depopulation. One of those methods is to make you sick. Chronic illness eventually is going to lead to death. Reproductive suppression of reproduction. That was an outcome of the. There were some FISA documents that were leaked back, I think, in 2021, because I remember doing a video on this. And in those documents, it was stated that the shots did indeed have a detrimental effect on both the male and female reproductive process.
Yep.
Yeah, so they want to get to a point where they want to have a population of literalists, people that believe what they believe. And if you don't believe what they believe and you happen to be here, then, as Crowley says, you'll be a slave and you shall serve.
Yeah. Interestingly, over the last 12 months in our research, we've come across several Crowleys who are related to Aleister Crowley in high-profile jobs. One of them's a guy called Chris. Came across him actually for some reason. They're attracting to him. One's called Nathan Crowley, who is Chris? A production set designer or something like that.
Yeah, set designer. He works with Christopher Nolan, the Oppenheimer guy. Christopher Nolan, director.
Okay.
So he's won Oscars for his set design. And then another one, I forget his first name now. He helped Boris Johnson into power. He was his PR agent.
The funny story behind that, Mike, because my wife's a PA for a company, and they were doing a presentation day, and this guy was going up on stage after the guy who was on there. There was a picture of Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Heart Club from the guy previous this presentation, and the guy who stood there and he went, "Oh, I'm related to him," and pointed at Aleister Crowley, and he was called, I forget his first name, he was called something Crowley. And he basically worked for like a PR company, but like Dom said, he got Boris Johnson into power. And I think Cameron as well, didn't he, Dom?
Yeah, and on his resume, he said he changed hundreds of thousands of minds. It was something like that in his wording. So again, this continuation of the bloodline into these sort of positions where they've got control, but behind the scenes. I mean, the guy's doing Batman films, for instance, and we don't know what's behind in those sets that's triggering things to happen.
Well, also, Dom, there's the first thing. I mean, the production designer could have the control of putting this imagery in there. Because if you remember in the second one, famously, there's a Sandy Hook on the map, isn't there? If you remember in the second map. I mean, that could be him. That could be him who popped that in there.
Was it his films where somebody ran into a Batman launch and started shooting people?
Yeah. That was they went into the cinema, didn't they, in America, Mike? and shot. Well, that was the guy who came in with the orange hair, and he looked totally MK Ultra, didn't he? In the court proceedings. Yeah, he went into a cinema and shot a lot of people. Apparently,
That was
these relationships. These relationships of no surprise. Dom and I were talking, Chris, before you joined us, before the show, that the relationship between people and events, it's all interconnected. It's all interconnected. And many of the people that have the real power are the ones that are behind the scenes. They're behind the scenes. They're the ones who are doing the orchestrating and the manufacturing and the staging of whatever it is. And the entertainment and music industry, I've explained it so many times, is completely controlled from cradle to grave. It's completely controlled because it is a major social engineering and mind control tool in the toolbox of the controllers. So this person being related, his bloodline going back to Crowley, as I mentioned, Crowley was an elitist.
Yeah.
He was part of the elite establishment, and the bloodlines, that's how they manage the world.
On his resume, Alex Crowley, OBE. I've worked in politics, helping deliver both Boris Johnson's election victories in London and his election as the leader of the party, Conservative Party, and Prime Minister.
Mm-hmm.
So we had a Crowley actually getting to deliver 2020.
And he openly admits being related to Aleister
Crowley. He actually pointed at him at the screen.
Yeah.
He did his speech. And then when he left, my wife chased him to the lift and he looked quite distressed. She said, did you say you're related to Aleister Crowley? And he went, yeah, I am. But he looked quite distressed by that point.
Yeah.
So
there you go.
Yeah, we had a listener after she heard Chris's story. They wrote in and said the other guy, Nathan Crowley, the set designer, is definitely related to him because her sister went out with Nathan Crowley's brother. And blah blah blah. So the picture starts building, doesn't it? When you start seeing these people linked together.
Yes. The linkages are all there. But again, to the average person, they're in the shadows because everybody or most people are paying attention to what's playing in front of the curtain. They never think to pull the curtain back and take a look to see the Great Oz pulling the levers. They don't go there. They sit in front of their television sets and they believe what's being fed to them, which is all BS. Propaganda. It's all BS. It's all propaganda. It's all being put out there to shape your thoughts and your values and your beliefs. I really wish people would wake up. I really do. Every day I wake up, have my cup of coffee in the morning. I do my blog, just to keep pushing information out there to shake the trees, to get people to wake up, open your eyes, hear with your ears, and stop buying the nonsense.
Yeah, well, they're still buying it, and they're still buying it and paying a high price for it as well.
Yes.
It's getting more blatant as well, isn't it? The nonsense is getting more and more blatant. But I don't know, some people just don't seem to be...
It's getting more blatant because, I'll give you my view on this, it's because there's really very little reaction from the masses. So I tell people that we live in a comic book. We're in some kind of cartoon, that this stuff is just so unbelievably over the top that how anybody can not question it is beyond me. But there are so many people, guys, that they don't question anything.
That Trump thing that you were on about, I mean, that was literally a wrestling move, wasn't it? He went down and then came up with a bloodied ear. He was surrounded by everybody, so no one could see what he was doing. And he comes up with a bloody ear. Does the photographic pose in front of the flag with it? I mean, come on.
Oh, yeah. And
you're buying that.
The photographer that caught the bullet whizzing by. Come on. And it was so clear that it was staged. And I called it right away, along with many others. But it was a defining moment, in my opinion, because there were alternative research and alt-right, if you will. I don't really like that term. That many people were following, that were putting out information that that's it's good information, or they were they were giving a perspective that was believable. But then when the whole Trump staged assassination took place, they played the assassination attempt card,
Yes.
and they kept pushing it and pushing it and pushing it. So when that happened, that's when a lot of people should have just changed the channel and turned those people off. Because if you don't have enough brain power to figure out that that wasn't a real event,
Yeah.
I don't know what to say.
It's same with the Bobby Kennedy Jr. Link. I got a load of grief a few years ago for saying, just be careful of this guy, because he's got all the he was in a lot of the institutions when he was younger, was a drug addict, alcoholic, etc. Of being within that family, some kind of mind control victim, whatever you want to call it. Also, his family, I think it's his sister, funds the Stop Oil stuff. She's part of the Stop Oil funding.
Yeah.
So along with the Getty family. I mean, the irony of all that is just, you just can't trust these people. You can't, they're there for a reason.
Yes.
And it's not for our benefit either.
No, RFK's job was to, he was to soften the anti-vax problems that Trump was having. So the plan, in my opinion, all along was to have him run as an independent for a while, take shots at Fauci, push the whole, we need to do a better job with things, because he's never said that he's anti-vax, by the way.
No.
He talks about more testing and safer vaccines. That's what people have to understand. But I think he was a prop that was put up there so that when Trump brought him on board, it gave the illusion that Donald Trump was going to be tough on vaccines. And recently, like we said, now he's going to invest $500 billion in artificial intelligence and vaccines. And evidently, I watched another piece of news where he sat down with Bill Gates for 3 hours.
Yeah. What's that about?
Another one with a royal bloodline.
Yes.
And he's knighted. Bill Gates is knighted.
Is he?
Yes.
They gave him. Okay.
Yeah,
and I know his family goes back to eugenics, back to Planned Parenthood.
It's Sir Bill Gates, and his ex-wife is Dame Melinda Gates.
Yeah. Yeah. I call her Manlinda.
Yeah, Manlinda.
Melvin, we call her.
Yeah, we call her Melvin. Yeah.
Something happened to her. I saw early pictures of her, and you see her today. I'm thinking, okay, that's not just age. He's got a Macron thing going on.
Yeah,
there, you know?
Do you think the when he came out immediately, so he had he mopped up a lot of people, JFK and Trump, that start to follow, and then immediately comes out with the 48-hour jib jab. Is it just to frazzle people's brain, do you think? Just because people will have followed him for that reason, then all of a sudden he comes out with that, and it's almost like people just don't want to almost forget that it even got mentioned.
He's revealed the method instantly on day one, hasn't it? Instantly.
Yeah. And what it's showing is that people can easily be led.
Yes.
So their trust in him overrides their common sense. It overrides their ability to logic through and apply critical thinking and reasoning to all of this.
Because they're jacked up on opium.
Well, he was the guy with Operation Warp Speed, and he's never let up. Whenever he was asked about, hey, do you have any regrets about the Operation Warp Speed? He continues to this day to say that it was a great thing, that it saved, he always throws out these ridiculous numbers too, millions of lives. Where do these numbers come from? People have to ask that question too. Where did these numbers come from? Oh, talking about numbers, going back to the 2020 election, which was a complete fraud. I keep telling people that they can put any numbers they want on the TV screen. They're not showing you any validation, not showing you anything. There's no reconciliation. So Trump got 74 million votes, and Biden, weekend at Bernie's, got 81 million votes. So what's 11 and 9? And something like something like 93 or 94% of all registered voters in the United States showed up and voted, which is absolutely ridiculous.
Boris Johnson was born June 19th, 1965.
Yeah.
In America, yeah. June 19th, 1965. 9/11's all the way through.
I remember actually I remember looking at the date 9/11, and I think I got this right. Just seeing what other things happened on that date through history. One thing that stood out, Mike, was a lot of, you have like regional TV stations in America, don't they? A lot of them did the first broadcast on 9/11, I noticed. I thought that was very odd. In different years, but always on 9/11. I thought that was very, telling.
And 9/11, guys, think about Building 7 that came down. So there's a number, another 7.
Yeah.
And the airplanes, Flight 77.
And here where I think we were going to talk about the Beatles.
Oh, well, we can get back.
I'm not bothered about it, by the way. I'm happy going wherever it goes.
No, it's okay. It's okay.
I'm sure you're more interested in talking about this stuff since you just spend hours talking about the other stuff anyway.
Oh, it's okay. I'll talk about whatever you guys want to talk about. I can go on and on about 9/11 and all that stuff as well. But yeah, we can go back to the Beatles.
Yeah. Where are you actually on 9/11? I know everyone's talking about bombs in the building. I like the Judy Wood type of story with the way she went with her research. I thought that was amazing. It was a fascinating book as well.
Yeah, I think it's multifaceted. The building was primed with explosives. I think that we have to look at Judy's work with a critical eye, because to think that they don't have energy weapons, we can see this with the fires in California as an example, where homes are incinerated.
Do you mean that's not climate change?
Yeah, that's not climate change, folks. That is clearly not climate change, okay? So I believe that a directed energy weapon is very possible as a scenario for 9/11, 2001, along with the building being primed with explosives. Because when we take a look at the buildings when they fell at free fall. You guys, I'm sure you know that. And Judy said the term she used was dustified. There was very little rubble when you think about the size of those buildings. They just crumpled down into a big cloud of dust. A couple of beams here and there.
Powder puff. Yeah, it was.
Yes. And then Building 7 was a controlled demolition. And anybody that can't see that was a controlled demolition, please, you need to wake up. And then what they did was they took everything from the debris from 9/11 and they fenced it off and they shipped it off to, they said, China. So it was a crime scene, but we don't care about that. We're going to take everything, put it in big dump trucks and take it away so nobody can evaluate it and assess it forensically. So everything in this reality is controlled.
And now they've got two black cubes there, haven't they, commemorating the...
Got like an abyss there, I think. Yeah, they've got like an infinity pool, weird black infinity pool.
Yeah.
For me, it was that girder that went down for me, mate, when it just disintegrated as it was dropping.
Yes, just disintegrated. And now they have the one tower, and that represents the middle path between the Twin Towers columns of Freemasonry, Joachim and Boaz. So it's the middle path to enlightenment and illumination. So, like I said, it's
the building
all occulted.
The building 7 was the Solomon building as well, wasn't it?
Well, the Solomon building.
Towers.
I think that was behind them, wasn't it? The Solomon building was a different building, I think.
I think 7 was the Call of Solomon building.
I'm gonna have to look that up. I don't think it was.
I think you might. I think Chris might be right. Or they had
could be right,
or they had a couple of floors in the building. It's been a long time. I don't remember.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Dom, take a look there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go on, Chris.
No, I'm going to say because usually behind the two pillars is the Solomon Temple, I think.
Yes.
I'm pretty sure I heard someone say that. It's not my research. I think it was Fritz Springmeyer actually heard someone say that.
You're right, Chris. It was the Solomon Brothers building.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm
So it
always
goes
right. Though.
back
You
to
need to.
King.
You need to learn.
Don't ever question him, Dom. Okay.
I got accused of that as well. It's something I've been accused of, saying I don't want to admit I'm wrong.
Yeah. Going back to King Solomon.
Yeah.
That's really a cornerstone of Freemasonry, King Solomon. So it's all occultic.
Yeah.
What are the chances? 2 pillars and the Solomon building. I mean, come on.
Right. That's right.
It is like someone's written computer code in, and it's just playing out like Grand Theft Auto, the game, and that we're living through at this moment in time. Just
Yeah, it's that. Yeah. In other words, are you asking, could we possibly be living in a simulation?
yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've thought about that,
yeah.
and to be honest with you, I lean in that direction because when I look at numbers, as I mentioned, I tell the audience before we started, I was talking to Dom and said that before I got into the Beatles, I didn't pay much attention to numerology. But going into the Beatles and reading the memoirs of Billy Shears, you had to start to understand numerology because it's a key component of what's behind the Beatles' psychological operation and all of the psychological operations that take place. It's numbers, especially 3, 6, and 9. Those 3 numbers are very powerful numbers. And it's pattern recognition. Right, Don, we talked about that. It's really about pattern recognition. So numbers are very important. It's their way of communicating too. That's how they communicate to themselves within the inner circle. So those who are in the inner circle, the occultists, that's how they talk to each other through
And
these
that's why
numbers.
people like us three and people listening, the numbers don't mean, all right, we look at them and see the pattern, but to us, they don't mean anything. We're not casting spells when you're using numbers
Right.
like, say, our show's 213 or whatever. We don't look at that and think, oh, it adds up to 33, fantastic, you know?
Right.
But they would actually put thought into that and to cast some kind of spell with it.
Yes.
Well, when Donald Trump got in, I was watching it late at night on. I couldn't sleep. I had the TV on, and I was just watching it on the news. And they kept saying it over and over again. He's the 45th and 47th president, and they kept repeating it. And
Yes.
that's what. And I didn't think about it until then. And I thought, oh, why did they keep repeating that over and over again?
And it's the same thing with Black Lives Matter and BLM.
Yeah,
That's another example. When he had I think his first debate with Biden, going back, I think that was his first term. Yeah. That was scheduled for September 29th, 9/11. So again, when the numbers 9 and are used together, whether it be a date or in the case of BLM, Black Lives Matter, these are transformational events. These are events that are going to change the complexion of reality. It's going to change the dynamics of our world. And it's not, and I'm not going to say they're planning to, because the planning already took place.
We're in the aftermath, aren't we?
The planning led to the 9/11 event. And then from there, from that event going forward, that's when they're going to implement the changes. So yes, Trump is a 9/11 event.
the trouble is as well. If you try to talk to someone about numerology, you can't help but sound nuts as well.
I know.
If you try to explain it to someone, and then you bring numerology into it, they start.
I know my wife. She stayed away from all this my lunacy for years. Right? She said, I don't want to go down that hole because I'll get lost in it if I do, because she knows what she's like. But as soon as they start talking about the numbers, right, that's when she got it, because she worked in a bank. Numbers were her game.
Numbers person.
Yeah. And a lot of people clicked into the numbers. COVID backwards is DIVOC as well, Mike.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
An evil spirit capable of possessing other creatures.
Yes. Yep. I remember when that was exposed.
Yes. Yeah.
And what people need to do, Dom and Chris, when it comes to numbers, don't just think it's crazy stuff. Think in terms of it's a language. They're speaking in a language, and think of numbers as symbols. And that's how they communicate back and forth within the inner circle of the elites, because they're all occultists. Now, some of them are considered to be the priesthood. Those would be the Kabbalists. Freemasons think of the Freemasons as the foot soldiers of the Kabbalists.
And there's different echelons of the Freemasons, isn't there? I mean,
Yes,
there's upper and lower echelons of them.
Yeah, so you have it goes up to the Scottish Rite, it goes up to the 33rd degree, and then above that, in the Memoirs of Billy Shears, it explains to us that there are 33 degrees of the Scottish Rite, and there's 13 degrees of the Illuminati. So the Illuminati is just not 1 degree. So there are degrees within the Illuminati. So we have let me see. And then there are 20 degrees above the Illuminati. And this would be people or entities that are truly shadow. You'll never know who these people are. You'll never know.
But Boris Johnson's genealogy is back to Bavaria, as is Tony Blair, as is Klaus Schwab, and loads of these people that were in that mix in 2020 were all, a lot of the genealogy went back to Bavaria, of all places, by accident, obviously.
Yeah, Bavaria and also Germany.
Yeah.
Germany is very important. There's a lot of, in fact, the Rothschilds go back to Germany, Frankfurt. Yep. And along with many other Marxists, their origins, they hail from Germany. In fact, Frankfurt is only a 6-hour drive, I think, from Hamburg, Germany. And that's why the Beatles were in Hamburg. Beatles were in Hamburg because Hamburg is considered to be, and I got this from a friend of mine, Patrick, who was very familiar with Germany and Europe. That Germany is considered one of the major media hubs in Germany. And so when the Beatles went to Germany, that was boot camp. That was Tavistock's way of getting them primed to increase their performance skills.
And obviously at that time, Germany would have been full of intelligence operatives because it's the Cold War, etc.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
What do you think the end plan is for the Beatles, Mike? Because there's been a lot of they've had a lot of attention over the last couple of years as well. A lot of documentaries that Peter Jackson made one, I think, didn't they? It's like a resurgence of attention. Like I said, even my nipper learning about it at school. What do you think the end game is? What do you think Macca wants to do?
Well, if we look to memoirs, what Tom explains in the book is that the Paul McCartney character has been set up as a graven Christ figure, as a savior figure. And what the book tells us is that many years from now, not next week, not next year, not 10 years from now, we're probably talking about 200-300 years from now, they're going to position Paul McCartney as a savior figure, with Aleister Crowley as a prophet. This is what the book is explaining. Now, I'm not saying I agree with this. I'm just saying this is what the book is explaining. Now, this could be what they're looking to do. Now, before people say, no, that can't possibly be, you got to think in terms of the popularity of the Beatles. I mentioned earlier that they are foundational to all pop music and to a lot of aspects of entertainment in general. And people view the Beatles, Beatle fans, many of them are Beatle freaks, and they idolize the Beatles as gods. So when you idolize, whether it be a band or an individual, you're following. You've got a shepherd. They become shepherds.
Yeah, for want of a better word.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm not just talking about the Beatles, but if you follow Led Zeppelin or the Doors or just pick any other band, and you're a fervent follower of theirs, then you are following them. They're shepherding you in a certain direction. I mean, David Bowie, as an example, was the early stages of transgender when you think about it.
Yeah,
Right?
definitely. Yeah.
Michael Jackson was the same thing. So I think where they're going with the Beatles, I call the Beatles the Pied Pipers of the Eon of Horus. Music is a very powerful tool in the toolbox of the controllers. And obviously, they know this. They've got this down in spades. So the Beatles' job was to take an entire generation and then generations after that and continue to lead them into this new eon, the Eon of Horus or the Age of Aquarius. Now, for those that are questioning this, take a look at the Sgt. Pepper album cover and take a look at how the Beatles are dressed. They're dressed in different colored outfits. They're pied outfits. Pied means multicolored. The Pied Pipers. The Pied Piper is derivative of the cult of Pan. It's another version of a story of Pan. So when we talk about the Eon of Horus, we're talking about a Luciferian ideology and philosophy. And tucked within that is the cult of Pan, and Crowley was in the cult of Pan, and the cult of Dionysus. These are all cults or philosophies that major on if it feels good, do it.
At any
No
cost.
rules.
At any cost.
Pretty much, right, at any cost. If it feels good, do it. There should be no barriers, no restrictions. You shouldn't be shackled. Pursue your true and pure will. This is Crowley. And that's what Luciferianism, that's what the cult of Pan and the cult of Dionysus are all about. And this has been tracking along for a long time. Now, before the Beatles, we had the Beat movement. And the Beat movement was predominantly another Marxist movement. And they considered themselves to be hedonists. And again, to do whatever it is that, that feels good, whatever compels you or motivates you to go do something, just go do it. And in fact, the Beatles, that's where it's one of the sources of how they came up with the name of the band. So the Beat movement, B-E-A-T, which really was, which was really came together in the 1950s. And then you have the Beat movement and the Beatles. But the Beatles also goes back to Egyptian mythology and the scarab beetle. And that talks to the scarab beetle in Egyptian mythology represents illumination and enlightenment. And the Beat movement, I know I'm skipping around a little bit here, but we can actually step that back to the Frankfurt School.
No, back to Germany again.
Back to Germany again. Germany is very, very important in all of this. The roots of many of the main characters go back to Germany. Karl Marx goes back to Germany. But the Frankfurt School is very, very important in this equation. They came about around the same time that Tavistock came into play. Tavistock actually grew out of Wellington House. Wellington House was the propaganda arm for the British military going back to World War I. After the war was over, it became the Tavistock Clinic, where they were allegedly helping shell shock soldiers, but what they were really doing was analyzing and experimenting, trying to understand to a much larger degree the effects of trauma and how to psychologically manipulate the human mind. And then in 1947, they became this Tavistock Institute of Human Relations. But connected at the hip with them was the Frankfurt School. And the Frankfurt School was all about implementing cultural Marxism.
Which is strange because a lot of the people from the Frankfurt School were zipping over to Britain between the wars, zipping over to the Rockefeller Foundation and back, and doing work between, from Britain to Frankfurt to the US, namely with the Rockefellers. which is where the Rockefellers came from. So it's no wonder, really.
Yes, it's all interconnected. They all work together. So when we talk about the Fabian Society, the Rockefellers, we talk about the Frankfurt School and Tavistock and the Club of Rome, just to name a few, they're all interconnected. And many of these players were paging in and out of these different functions and organizations because it's an internationalist structure. So think in terms of a corporation. It's structured exactly like a corporation. And they go from function to organization within that corporate structure. And that's how they do their planning, their strategizing, and also their execution. So decisions are made at the top, and then those decisions are pushed down the corporate chain to layers that are responsible for implementing the strategy and the vision.
And they won't even know what the full vision is, then, people, will they?
No, that's the thing. It's like exactly like a corporation is compartmentalized. If you work for a corporation, if you work for Exxon and you're doing X, Y, and Z in a particular department, let's say you're an executive, a director or a vice president, that does not mean that you are in full knowledge of what was discussed and what the direction is that was discussed in the CEO's office or with the board of directors. You don't know that. So it's very compartmentalized. It has to be that way so that they can accomplish their goals. If too many people know, then there's too many mouths that can run their mouths and spill the beans. So everything is contained. Everything is kept within verticals. But at the very top, it's all connected with a horizontal.
How important? I mean, I can't. When Chris introduced me to your work, I'd come about the Beatles from a totally other side before, because I read a book, the John Coleman book, the Committee of 300, prior to knowing about your research into the Beatles. So I come across that idea of what happened with the Beatles and Tavistock from that book. How important do you think his work is, John Coleman?
I think John Coleman's his work is very, very important, and I'll have some people comment and say that he was controlled opposition, he was this, he was that, and my response back to them is, go read his books and tell me where he got it wrong.
Yeah, that's what I said. Yeah,
he didn't.
No,
that's the answer. He did not.
No.
So I think John Coleman did he did great work. He was very prolific in his writing because he wrote books on the Rothschilds. He wrote books on the Club of Rome, the Committee of 300, on Tavistock. There's a lot of insights that John Coleman shared. Mm-hmm. And some people will say, well, Dr. John Coleman wasn't his real name. It's an alias. I'm like, well, you know what? There's a lot of people that have aliases for various reasons, and I could understand why somebody might use one if he was divulging the information he was divulging. Well, others will say that, well, he doesn't have a lot of citations. Well, that's because what he was revealing is not in the public domain. Mm. So if you're privy to information that's not in the public domain, in other words, it's classified information, it's confidential information, what are you going to cite?
You don't get to take them documents out, do you? You've got to memorize them, write it down, whatever. You don't get to take pictures of them all the time.
That's what he said too. He said that when he went to take a look, because he was an operative within British intelligence, if I recall.
Yeah.
And when he would look at certain documents, he wasn't allowed to take a pen and pencil with him. He had to read the documents, and basically he had to go by memory and remember the key points. And then he would go home and he would write about what it is that he was reviewing or researching on that particular day or days.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of other writers that spring to mind that had similar experiences. That's Anthony C. Sutton and Carol Quigler.
Yes.
Who were pretty mainstream and realised the sort of information they had hold of went against everything that they actually thought was really happening.
Yeah. So I think that Coleman was very important, and it was in his book, in the Committee of 300, that he talked about the Beatles being a creation of the Tavistock Institute, and the memoirs of Billy Shears hints to that book and to Coleman. by talking about the Committee of 300 and then talking about the snitch. The snitch was Coleman. He was the person that was on the inside that became a whistleblower in a sense and started to spill the beans about the Committee of 300, which before his book wasn't really known.
And it was only a small part of the book. It weren't a paragraph.
The Beatles?
Yeah, about the Beatles in that book. It was only a little bit, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was here and there. Whenever he wanted to make a point about Tavistock, and if the Beatles were pertinent to what he was writing about. So I would say maybe about 4 or 5 times in the book, he brought the Beatles up. And he had mentioned that Theodore Adorno was deeply involved in the Beatles' work. He had said in the book that Adorno wrote all of the Beatles' music, but that's where I parted ways. I did not agree with Dr. Coleman because when I took a look at what Adorno was involved in, and for those who don't know, Theodore Adorno was one of the primary players of the Frankfurt School. And again, he was his claim to fame was critical theory. So critical theory, what that is it's a concept or a way of criticizing existing norms or existing beliefs and breaking them down in order to get somebody to think a different way, to think in an opposite direction. So that was critical theory, and Adorno's, that was one of his specialties. So Adorno was there with Max Horkheimer, Erich Fromm, Herbert Marcuse. These were all Jewish intellectuals that were implementing cultural Marxism, Marxist ideology. In fact, it was Max Horkheimer who had said that the evolution from where the world is today to where it's going to be by implementing cultural Marxism, people won't even realize at the end of the day they are now living in a Marxist society. He said it was going to be very methodical and very incremental. So anyway,
Isn't it interesting though that while the Beatles were in Hamburg practicing, he was in Frankfurt. It's not a million miles away from.
No, it's only 6 hours away. Driving. Yeah,
that operation there. It'd be an interesting one to look into the background of the club owners and who owned the buildings that they were playing in and stuff like that as well.
Wait, I was thinking about when you think about the Beat Generation, which was like hedonistic or whatever, like you said.
Yeah.
But then you think that was hedonistic then. Look where we are now. I mean,
right.
Bloody hell. I mean,
now we've got Sam Smith and...
The Beat movement was the cult of Pan. So everything is supposed to be spontaneous. Like I said, if it feels good, do it. That's why they associated with jazz, because jazz is a free-flowing, it's free-flowing genre of music with spontaneity. Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with jazz. I'm just saying they. Yeah, I do too.
Chris is a jazz man. Yeah.
Who was the guy? Too. One of them was married to a Rothschild. Was it Thelonious Monk? I forget who. It's a famous jazz
one
musician.
Of them a famous
married to a Rothschild.
Oh, I don't know. Okay.
I think Matt Devlin told us that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Mark would know.
Yeah, Mark would know. Yeah.
Mark would know. Yeah. So, so the Beats, they're the cult of Pan, and in fact, William S. Burroughs, who was one of the big names, one of the primary players in the Beat movement, is on the cover of Sgt. Pepper. And I think it was Allen Ginsberg that Billy, Paul McCartney, did some collaboration with. In fact, there's a video with him with Ginsberg. He's playing guitar and Ginsberg is reading some beat poems or whatever, something that's extremely boring. And John Lennon was a big fan of another big name in the Beat movement, Jack Kerouac. So we can see that the Beatles have the linkages going back to the Beat movement. The Beat movement has its linkages going back to the Frankfurt School. And again, we're leaning right into cultural Marxism. So that the Beatles were a tool of the cultural Marxists is what I'm saying. So it took me a long time to get there, but That's the punchline.
Like the Beatles, mate. The beat movement was pushed. I remember it being pushed on me as it was trendy to like Jack Kerouac and William Burroughs and and all those guys. And you read them, and a lot of it was shite, to be fair. But you read them because you were told it was cool, yeah.
In colleges, in a lot of colleges, it was required reading to read the books of Kerouac's books and the such. So it was very much pushed, and anything that's pushed like that, there is an agenda behind it. So, it's very methodical, very incremental. They set the stage, and then they take it, very incrementally, stepping it forward from, this piece of the puzzle to the next piece of the puzzle to the next. And, at some point, they're going to have all the pieces of the puzzle together, and that's their end game.
I mean, even down to the fact of the publishers of books or of records, all of these, you can run a scenario. Boris Johnson released a book about Churchill, and the company that released it have got ties, obviously, to I think it was the CIA and MI6 when I looked into it. And every time you look into it, like EMI with the Beatles links to, they're all got military intelligence written all over them.
Yes. Yeah, EMI goes back to British military. I think they were doing radio technology back during World War II. So EMI was linked into the British military industrial complex, which would also tie them back to the Frankfurt School. In my research, I can point to Churchill, and he was a Zionist.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Okay.
Among other things.
Among other things, yeah.
Yeah.
A lying alcoholic might be another one.
I was going to say a drunk.
Just fits in nicely with Boris. Exactly the same bloodline.
Yeah. Well, they did the same thing with Boris as they did with Joe Biden. See, they've got the population so up to their eyeballs in pop culture that they're now giving them cartoon characters. So that's the level of people's ability to think. It's at the level of a cartoon.
It's like they're bringing it that far down to see how far this mouse utopia that can get us.
Yes. Yeah, since you like cartoons, we're going to give you a cartoon character. Yeah. That'll be your president. That'll be your prime minister.
Vote Bugs Bunny.
I've often said as well, Mike, I think your American wrestling was part of the training to get us ready for this point where it just seemed like a bloody wrestling match. I was outside and he said this, and it's just it's ridiculous when you see him talking to each other.
It's moronic. It really is. It's just beyond anything that I could have possibly have thought was going to transpire. If I just go back 10 or 15 years ago, I mean, we had a guy in office, Joe Biden, if that was even him, who was wearing the latex mask that day. Yeah. The guy is walking around. He goes to speak. He steps away from the podium. He's wandering aimlessly around the stage. He's obviously either he's demented or he's playing the part of somebody with dementia. And 50% of the country believes that man's running something. Think about that.
He can't even run a
character. He was a character, wasn't he, mate? He was just another character. Like Boris was a character.
Exactly.
He was playing a character. He was so obvious.
They're all characters. Even Trump's a character. You know, with all of his, he's very boisterous and he's loud. And this is what it has come to. It's like in the United States, the office of the presidency is no longer refined. There's no more refinement about it.
No, it's a joke.
It's
like the Prime Minister. Yeah, it's like the Prime Minister in Britain. Yeah.
Eating McDonald's.
Yeah, they eat McDonald's and then tell you to be healthy.
Yeah, they should just come out in clown outfits with big red noses and big red feet.
Those little cars that wheels fall off.
Square wheels, Chris. But one thing that Chris sent me over when the lockdown started was your 4-hour odyssey, if you like, into the Beatles music. What got you thinking on that road before? I've always wanted to ask you that. Why?
Yeah. So I released it back on April 1st of 2020, April Fool's Day, because Billy associates himself with the Fool of the tarot deck.
Right.
And it's people see the profane think of April Fool's Day as just a day of pranks. But the Fool card in the tarot deck represents somebody who is embarking on a new adventure, an adventure that has a lot of unknowns. And so they're going to require a lot of luck. So that really that summarizes Billy, because when he took on the role of Paul McCartney, there were a lot of unknowns. Even though he had this gigantic machine behind him, from an individual perspective, you have to think to yourself, is this really going to work?
Yeah.
Right?
You got to have a lot of trust. You got to have a lot of trust in your skill, haven't you?
So what happened was, I was looking at the Beatles for about 4 years when I purchased this DVD that was titled Deconstructing the Beatles, and it was talking about Rubber Soul. I call it Deconstructing Rubber Soul, and the author of the DVD is Scott Fryman. And Scott Fryman is a very accomplished musician. He's a musicologist, but he pitches the Beatles' official narrative. So I'm not knocking Scott. That's his bag. Good for him. But I'm a musician and I'm a songwriter. And so when I bought the DVD, I got about 15, 20 minutes into it. And the setup was Scott was explaining to the audience that the Beatles came into the Rubber Soul sessions. They arrived on October 11th. Recording started on October 12th of 1965. And they had 30 days to nail down 16 original compositions. But they came into the sessions with essentially no material, no songs written. And in the official narrative, we see, I think, maybe 2 or 3 songs that we're told were partial songs. But even if you have a partial song, that's a partial song. You still have to complete the song. You have to rehearse the song. You have to arrange the song. And then you have to record the song. So I looked at that and I said, okay, let's just make this real easy. They're coming into the Rubber Soul sessions on October 11th of 1965, and they don't have any music written.
And just to make it clear, on my limited recording, we used to have a little recording studio. So we put tracks together in the late 90s and take them into a bigger recording studio where they'd have an engineer. If you didn't have something written, it cost you a fortune.
Yes. Yes. And some people will argue, well, the Beatles had free studio time. Well, let's just say that the Beatles had free studio time. You still have to pay the staff. You still have to pay the engineer. George Martin had to get paid. You had to keep the lights on in the studio.
It's not free anyway. It comes off the cost, doesn't it? The EMI or whoever paying for it will take it off.
Exactly. There's costs being incurred, but people make up all kinds of different.
Why would the Beatles have free recording time? It just nobody has free recording time unless
they'll say because because the Beatles were so important and this and that to EMI and to their revenue stream and all that stuff. But the thing is, nothing is free, and it's really, and to be honest with you, that's a red herring. It really doesn't have anything to do with the fact that they showed up with nothing, and they had to write 16 songs, 14 for the album, 7 songs on each side. Remember, I talked about 7 and 7, and then 2 songs for double A side single. We Can Work It Out and Day Tripper. So when I got to that part of the DVD, which was about 15 minutes in, I said that was impossible. That was impossible. It's not possible. I remember sitting there watching it and going, this is crazy. This can't possibly be the story. So I started digging in. And as I started digging, I found clips, various clips of where the Beatles are actually telling you, they're giving you the lowdown of how this really worked. As an example, there was an interview in June of 1966, and they were in Japan in the Hilton, and there was a press conference, and they were asked about their music, and Paul McCartney said that they never said that they were great musicians; they were adequate. Okay, so hold on a second. At that point, you've got 7 studio albums under your belt, and you're supposed to be the most phenomenal band in the world, 2 of the greatest songwriters in pop music ever. And during an interview that's televised, you said that your musicianship is adequate at best. And I'll get back to why that's important in a moment. And then on August 5th of 1966, that's the day that their seventh album, that's the album after Rubber Soul. Rubber Soul was their sixth studio album, and their UK releases are their official releases. Paul does an interview, along with John, with the BBC. And in the BBC interview, Paul restates that they never said that they were great musicians and that they were limited as a band. And then went on to say that he and John said that for the last album, he was talking about Revolver, he said it took weeks just to get one song written. So if it took them weeks to get one song written for Revolver, how did you write 16 for Rubber Soul in 30 days, which is weeks, 4 weeks? Also in that interview, Paul said, because Paul, he really dropped the bombshells in that interview, that August 5th, 66 interview. He said that they did not write music in between albums normally. And he pauses and he says, maybe one or two. We wrote in great big batches whenever we had to go into the studio or to do a film. It's really when they had to go into the studio, because the songs that were on the albums, or the songs that were in the film, but the songs that were on the album. So it was really the songs they had to record in the studio for the albums. And the BBC interviewer says, well, I always thought it was impossible to write that many songs on demand, spur of the moment. And then John and Paul say, well, it is sometimes quite impossible. And that's when Paul talks about, or John talks about, taking weeks to write just one song for the last album, which was Revolver. So the reason why that's important is because the official narrative tells us, and many, many Beatle fans will say this, that the Beatles were a perpetual motion machine of writing. They were writing all the time. They were writing at home. They were writing on the road. They were writing on airplanes. They were writing when they were in the studio. They were writing when they were on the film sets. They were writing when they were on vacation. They were always writing songs. That's all they ever did. And then in that interview, Paul said, that's not true. We did not write in between albums. And he just blew that entire piece of the official narrative right out of the sky. So now what we're left with is what Paul is telling us, that the way they wrote in great big batches. So in this very short period of time, they had to come up with 12, 14, or 16 songs.
It has all the hallmarks of a team of people behind them.
Yes.
That were coming up with all these.
Yes. And that's what I deducted, Dom. The way I said it worked was, well, I'll get to the punchline here, so I don't keep everybody in suspense. All of the songs were pre-written, and they were recorded by studio musicians. And this was George Martin's job to get all of that done. So who was writing the songs? I get that question a lot. We don't really know who all the writers were. Could it have been Theodore Adorno as one of the writers? Absolutely. Listen to the song Piggies on the White Album. That's pure Adorno. The music, the Baroque orchestration, the lyrics, that's Adorno. Textbook Adorno. George Martin, well, in all likelihood, wrote Beatles songs. In fact, I have a clip of him saying that the guitar work, or the guitar lead, I think he said, in Michelle, is his composition. So in Beatle lore, we're told that was, George Harrison doing that. And here's George Martin saying it was him.
Just for one song as well, that sort of wipes the slate on everything else, doesn't it? That one admission there, really.
Yeah. So once you have cracks in the dam like that, that opens the floodgates to question everything else. So one of my team members, when I was doing this, because I didn't do this by myself, one of the people that I was working with going back when I was putting the big presentation together, it's called "Did the Beatles Write All Their Own Music?" Was a person out of the UK, and I can't say who this person is, extremely accomplished and has been in the music industry for a long time, and actually has done work with Paul McCartney / Billy Shears a couple of times. And he analyzed the song structures and the styles during the early period, 62 through 66. And he concluded that there were two distinct songwriting styles. So what we concluded was that in all likelihood, there were two separate teams. One, maybe two or three songwriters, was dedicated to Paul McCartney style songs. And another two or three songwriters were dedicated to writing, quote, John Lennon style songs. So I believe it was a small kludge of songwriters with George Martin clearly managing. I consider him to be the managing director of the operation, possibly reporting up through Theodore Adorno and up through Tavistock and the Franklin School.
Because people say to me, how could they keep a secret that the writers there were other writers, but they've kept a secret that there were other band members playing the music. So if they can keep that secret, then keep the other secret, can't they?
Of course, this is the thing. It's all compartmentalized. I mentioned before that the entertainment and the music industry is completely controlled. So what that means, when I say it's completely controlled, I mean it's completely controlled. and you have people who are running it that are in secret society. So we'll just pick on the Freemasons.
I mean, look how far the poll slid down. They've now got if Sam Smith was in the 1960s, he would have looked like he'd just come from another planet.
Yeah.
Taylor Swift, another one.
And that Beatles model now has been used over and over again, where they take a semi-wholesome band and then they go off to whatever.
And drug them to death. Yeah,
start taking drugs.
Yeah.
Yes,
but they do it all the time now with the wholesome, what you perceive as a wholesome, character, and then they've got the following, and then they start taking them down the dark satanic path.
Amy Winehouse is a good example of that.
Amy Winehouse is a good one.
Yeah. There's this
Hannah Montana.
This whole transformational process. The example I use, which is exactly what you guys are referring to, take a look at the music scene back in the 1962 and how bands and performers, artists were dressed.
The Righteous Brothers type of thing. Yeah.
Yes. And then fast forward to 1969 in Woodstock.
Yeah.
That's only 7 years.
Yeah, I'm going to say it's not a long time, is it?
And look what happened in 7 years.
Yeah.
So with the Beatles, now there's an interview that Phil Spector did back in 1976. This is very interesting. And it was published in an Australian music publication called RAM, RAM. Kind of interesting because Billy came out with his second album, RAM. But it really goes back to New Music Express. And so the interviewer is interviewing Phil Spector, and Spector now is beginning to spill the beans because Phil was saying that his involvement with the Beatles was not limited to the Get Back sessions and the creation of the Let It Be album. So there's two different stories of how Phil got involved with Let It Be. One is that John Lennon and George Harrison asked him to pull together the tapes and make something out of it, because I have a quote from John Lennon where he said that they handed over to Phil the biggest pile of shit recorded, and he did something with it, and Phil did a great job. The other story says that Alan Klein was the main protagonist that brought Phil Spector in.
Right.
But during that interview in 1976, Phil explains, he says to the interviewer, he's making the claim that he was heavily involved with the Beatles prior to Let It Be. And so the interviewer is, you could when you're reading this, you could tell he's like, what? I've never heard this before. So Phil said, when they arrived in America, was I not on the plane with them?
Wow.
So then what happens is the bell goes off, right? Like a light bulb goes off in the interviewer's head. I forgot the name of the interviewer. I apologize to the audience. I'll put a link down below. I'll send you guys the link.
Yeah.
So now it's starting to come together. And Phil, his de facto house band was the Wrecking Crew. Okay? So that would say that was something that supports what I have suspected for a long time, that the Beatles recordings were not just limited to being recorded by studio musicians in the UK, but it's possible, and I think at this point, based upon the Spector interview, that those tapes also made their way over to the United States, to LA, where the Wrecking Crew was involved. People like Hal Blaine and the such. Now, to give more credence to that, if we go back to Bernard Purdie, now Bernard Purdie is one of the greatest studio musicians, drummers in modern times. Yeah. And he's in the Drummer Hall of Fame, and he drummed for Aretha Franklin for 25 years. And Bernard has been on many, many records. He's played with Steely Dan. He's played with the Rolling Stones. We can go on and on and on and on.
I mean, if you played with Steely Dan, I mean, they were so finicky with their musicians.
Oh, yes. Yes. Oh, yes. And he played with Steely Dan. Bernard is top shelf. Back in 1978, he said that he drummed on 21 Beatle tracks. Beatle tracks. Now, people want to argue with me and say, no, he drummed on the Tony Sheridan tracks, which was pre-Beatle fame. And I said, he did that too. He drummed on the Tony Sheridan tracks because Brian Epstein hired him to redo the drum tracks to give them more oomph and more presence for the American market. But he also drummed on the 21 early Beatle tracks. And the early albums that I believe that Bernard drummed on were the Beatles' first album out of the UK, Please Please Me, their second album with the Beatles, and their third album, A Hard Day's Night. Now, it's very possible he drummed on other songs after that, but I think those first three albums are probably the meat and potatoes of what he drummed on. And then in 2000, I
suppose these. I always equate it to the stuntmen. You don't really see the stuntmen in the film. You think it's the star that's jumping off the building, but these people are playing behind the scenes because they can't afford for it to go wrong. Not just the music release as being important, but the message, what the cultural changes they're trying to push as well.
It's a major operation, and you're not going to futz around with substandard musicianship, terrible songwriting. You're going to make sure it all gets done right. And then in 2004, Bernard did an interview with Red Bull, and in that interview, he said that there are 4 drummers on the Beatles' music, and I believe he was talking about the early period, 62 to 66. And he said Ringo was not one of them.
He always looks lost to me, does Ringo? He always looks like he looks like he shouldn't be there.
Yeah, Ringo was hired. Ringo was there to do the live stuff, and a lot of stuff when they were playing live was they were playing to backing tracks or to offstage, backstage musicians. There were times when they did play live. I'll get to that in a moment if we have time, but I just wanted to touch on, there was Glenn Campbell was with the Wrecking Crew. Glenn has passed away now, but he was a phenomenal guitar player. And he was co-hosting the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour in July of 1968. And he was introducing Cream on the show. And Cream is Eric Clapton. We know that Eric played lead guitar on While My Guitar Gently Weeps. Jack Bruce played bass, and Ginger Baker was Cream's drummer. And he said that they were the cream of the crop from a studio musician perspective out of the UK. And he said that they played on Beatle albums, the Rolling Stones, and he rattled off a number of other acts. So here we have Glenn Campbell, who's a studio musician himself, who clearly, and all these guys know each other. All these studio guys know each other. It doesn't matter whether they're in the United States or they're across the pond in the UK. They all work together. They know each other. And he's saying that members of Cream played on Beatle records. And people want to argue with me, say, no, he was talking about Eric playing guitar While My Guitar Gently Weeps. Well, I don't think so, because he introduced Cream in July of 68. George Harrison, according to the official narrative, did not ask Eric Clapton to play on While My Guitar Gently Weeps until September of 1968, 2 months later. So we have a relative of the late, great Ronnie Verrill, who was another studio musician out of jazz musician and studio player out of the UK. A family member sent me an email after I released my big presentation back in April of 2020 and said to me, well, Mike, now that the cat is out of the bag, she was related to Ronnie Verrill, family member, and said that Ronnie drummed on Beatle tracks as well. We know that Andy White drummed on at least 2 Beatle tracks. That's per the official narrative, P.S. I Love You and Love Me Do. And then I had another person who does research into the Beatles. his side job, I think he does electrical work. Well, he did electrical work for a studio drummer, again, out of the UK. And they got into a conversation about Ringo and the Beatles and all of this. And he said that one, Bernard did indeed drum on the 21 tracks that he said he drummed on. And he said that Alan White, who was the drummer for Yes, also drummed on Beatle records.
You see, these people are not like Alan White, who drum for Yes, for instance. He's not going to come out and say something because
no,
he don't want to ruin his career.
They can't say anything.
Yeah.
Do you think Phil Spector said it just because he came across as a bit of an egomaniac, didn't he, Phil Spector? Do you think he said that in that interview because he wanted people just to know that he was involved?
Yeah.
Through his
Phil, Phil had a huge ego.
He's a connected guy as well, though, because he's been let off so much, hasn't he? If you think about it.
Hey, by the time he was 25, he was a big, big time producer. By the time he was 25 years old. And so, Phil had a big ego. So I think in 1976, now we're talking about 6 years after the Beatles broke up, I think Phil got to the point where he thought to himself, I'm not getting any credit for how involved I was with this whole operation. So I'm just going to drop a couple of clues, and I'm not going to spill the beans, but I'm going to give you enough breadcrumbs that if you're intelligent enough, you'll be able to figure out that what I'm telling you. And I'm telling you, I was there. I was a big part of their success. I was a big part in what went down and in their recording. It's interesting because Hal Blaine has passed away. Hal Blaine was a drummer for the Wrecking Crew. Hal Blaine talks a lot about working with John Lennon. Well, how did these relationships form? It's interesting. I was watching two videos recently about two guys from the Wrecking Crew that played on John Lennon's rock and roll album. This was released in the 1970s. They said John showed up with a bottle of vodka. Phil Spector had his Wrecking Crew, his guys recording the songs, and John was sipping away at vodka. And by the end of the night, he was spread out on the couch. Okay, so I mean, when you hear stories like this, you have to ask the question:
how much? What involvement did they actually have?
What's really going on here?
There's a story that Robbie Williams and his famous song "Angels" was stolen off a guy in Ireland, and he keeps trying to convince people, even though he's paid this guy off, that he wrote the song. And this isn't just a Beatles thing; it goes on. Song stealing, that's a separate thing, or other people writing people's songs has always happened. It just happened on a massive scale with the Beatles because of the cultural change they were involved in as well.
And song credits, being credited for a song only requires a contract. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So people will ask me sometimes, well, how could this be? They're credited with the song. That doesn't mean anything.
No, you try suing EMI. You're not winning.
Well, and all of these arrangements are all legally bound. And they say, well, these people who wrote the songs, aren't they out a lot of money? Trust me, they were well compensated to do what they did because they're part of the operation.
When you've got true believers behind the scenes, the financial aspect to them is not as important as the pop star because they're doing it for a belief. They're doing it for a reason, aren't they? That's their job.
It's their job, and it's something they believe in. And the Beatles were a product. They were a product. And the other thing with Rubber Soul, I'll touch on this real quick, is that the manufacturing process, the timeline does not work at all. They tell us that they were able to get Rubber Soul, the album, out into retail on December 3rd of 65 in 2.5 weeks. So they pressed the final lacquer on November 17th of 1965. And then 2.5 weeks later, the album.
I don't even believe they'd do that in 8.5 weeks. Or even leave it to chance for 8.5 weeks, should I say.
Yes. Well, what I did was I used 8 weeks, 2 months as a stake in the ground. And what I was saying was if EMI pulled out all of the stops, which in itself is very difficult to do because that record was coming out for the Christmas season and EMI had a whole roster of artists who recorded albums for Christmas. So to pull out all the stops just for the Beatles means that they were leaving money on the table because other artists' records wouldn't have gotten pressed. So we know that in all likelihood that didn't happen. Maybe some lesser artists, perhaps, but there were a lot of big names at the time, and so they weren't going to shelve them just for the Beatles because, like I said, a lot of money would have been left on the table. So the official narrative tells us that George Martin finished up the song sequencing on November 16th. Now, the song sequencing is very important because that's the order in which the songs are going to play on the record. Track 1, track 2, track 3, track 4, and so on, sides A and side B. And also, the album covers and the record labels, the central labels under 33 RPM records, are going to have the songs listed in sequenced order. Well, how did all the labels and all of the album jackets get pressed, thousands of them, between November 16th, when George Martin finished up the sequencing, and November 17th, when they finished the lacquer, they finalized the mono lacquer, and they had to have started the pressing process. The pressing process either started on November 17th or the very latest November 18th, the very next day. How did that happen?
I don't think it even happened today, even if with the digital technology that they've got. In the corporate world, they can't leave it to chance.
No.
They just can't leave that type of money or the operation to chance that it might just happen to be ready in December.
Yeah, so what happened, Dom and Chris, was because all the songs were written weeks or months before, George Martin knew the run times. So he knew the song was 2.5 minutes, 3 minutes long. He was then able to sequence them. And once he had the run times and the sequencing done, he was able to put the requisition in to start the printing process for the labels and the jackets. Now, the other thing, too, is that the reason why the labels are so important is because the labels are pressed at the exact same time that the vinyl is pressed. They are not adhered to later. So that means that the album jackets and the labels had to be in-house at the plant on standby for when they were ready to press the vinyl. That means that the printing process took place weeks in advance. So that process was well underway by the time the Beatles arrived at EMI Studios on October 11th of 1965. So what did the Beatles do for 30 days? They sang the vocals. That was their job because George Martin already had the completed instrumentals because they were already recorded, already edited, already mixed down. And then once the Beatles finished the vocals, he was then able to marry the vocals with the instrumentals, and the song was completed. That's how it was done. And what went out to retail on December 3rd of 1965 was the initial batches of the albums. And then pressing obviously continued beyond that. But they had to get an initial batch of records out on December 3rd of 65 in time for the Christmas season. So that's the problem with Rubber Soul. Two problems. One, 16 songs in 30 days. That didn't happen. And number two, the manufacturing process, the cycle time does not work.
Yeah. I'm conscious of the time. We're an hour and 3/4 in, believe it or not, in a blink.
Yeah, I know. Went quick.
Once you see that 4-hour docu presentation, if you like, that you did back then, it probably opened up even more doors. Is there something afterwards that you think you should have put in there as an addition? Is there anything that you learned after the sort of presentation?
Well, yes. So I followed up 3 years later.
Because there always is, isn't there?
Yes,
sadly, whether we like it or not.
Well, what happened was 3 years later, I published, did the Beatles write all their own music, the addendum. And so basically there was footage and more information that I put in the addendum to help support and bolster my conclusion that the Beatles did not write all their own music and they did not play on all their recorded tracks. Now, 62 to 66, I don't believe they wrote any music, and I don't believe they played on any of the recorded tracks. From 67 to 70, that changed. John and George wrote, more of their own stuff and played on more of the recorded tracks, although ghostwriters and studio musicians were still in play. And then I guess about 9 months ago, I did a presentation that just spoke to Rubber Soul. The first presentation really takes you from the very beginning up through Rubber Soul and then into the White Album, because I had concluded that the White Album was really the first album that is really a Beatles album from the perspective of where there was actual songwriting from John and George. Billy was always writing. And they were actually playing on many of the recorded tracks, but they weren't playing on all the recorded tracks. As an example, in all likelihood, Dear Prudence, Julia, and Happiness is a Warm Gun is not John Lennon playing the guitar that on those songs. Like if you listen to the guitar picking on Dear Prudence, in all likelihood, that's Donovan, because the story goes that he learned that chord picking style from Donovan, and it's not an easy chord picking style. It's not. Take it from me as a guitar player. I'm not saying it can't be done, but it's not something you're shown when you're out in India, and then you show up in the studio and you're like, okay, well, this is what Donovan taught me, and here we go. So I think that Donovan played on Beatle tracks, and he was another one of those musicians. Eric Clapton, Vic Flick, the great studio player out of the UK. He passed away recently, but he was with the George Martin Orchestra. Big Jim Sullivan, another big time studio player out of the UK, was in all likelihood on Beatle tracks. I believe he played the sitar on Norwegian Wood, because Big Jim was he was an accomplished sitar player. In fact, he released 2 sitar albums, I think in 1968 and 1969. And the narrative tells us that George Harrison used to visit him.
Yeah.
Or he used to visit George Harrison to be tutored or whatever. So I thought to myself, well, I don't know. I just think that Jim showed up with a sitar and knocked it out.
Sounds more likely.
Yeah. How easy would that be to do? Jim, you've got 2 albums we're going to release for your music. If you just do this for this one song.
The guy nails it in 15 minutes and walks out.
Yeah, exactly.
There's also when Quincy Jones has passed away too, but Quincy was a big time producer, and there's a story that goes back a number of years ago where in an interview he said that the Beatles were no playing MFers.
Yeah.
And he specifically pointed out Paul McCartney and Ringo Starr, and then tells a story where Ringo could not get this drum part down. He could not get it down. And he told Ringo to take a break, go get something to eat. And he brought Ronnie Verlin. Apparently Ronnie was there, and he brought Ronnie in. Ronnie is one of the drummers I mentioned earlier. And Ronnie nailed the drum part. And then Ronnie left. And then Ringo came back into the studio, and he's like, all right, well, let me listen to the playback now, right? And so they played back for him, and he says, well, that doesn't sound too bad. And Quincy Jones says, that's because it's not you. But there's lots of stories. There's an interview that George Harrison did in the 1980s where he said that he and Ringo Starr never practiced.
Yeah.
He said, I could be a guitar player, a good guitar player, but I don't practice. And in fact, he said that there were times when years went by when he didn't pick up the guitar.
And any player, I mean, you're a guitar player, but anybody, whether you're a sportsman, whatever you're doing, if you're not practicing, you aren't improving. That's your work, isn't it? That's anyway.
No, you cannot show up in a studio because George said, "Oh, I would pick up the guitar when I had to go record an album." Wrong. Listen, guitar players will know this. There's calluses on your fret hand. Okay, if you haven't played in a year, if you haven't played in a month, those calluses, they're not callous anymore.
Yeah, you're going to cut some ribbons out there. Yeah.
Yes, I mean, your fingers would be bleeding if you were going to sit down and say, okay, now I'm going to record an album of 10 songs, 11, 12 songs. It'd be a very painful event. So you got to factor these things in. But a lot of people who are lay people, they don't understand, which I understand why they don't understand, but it's important to start to understand so that the story makes sense.
Chris, we got an email,
but you explained it very well in that 4-hour presentation.
Yeah, we got an email from somebody. What was that email?
An email?
We got an email from somebody. Yeah,
we got an email from someone saying, let me get this right, that they knew someone who was a music critic when Sergeant Pepper's came out
Yeah.
in London. They worked in London, and they gave it a bad review, and they
Yeah.
got instantaneously sacked.
Yes.
It's just anecdotal, but whether that's true or not. But I'm guessing it was for a big magazine, so that wouldn't fit in with the agenda push, if you like.
Sergeant Pepper was so important.
Yeah.
Pepper was so important to kick off the psychedelic era. And so, to come out in a mainstream, mainstream media, whether it be newspaper or magazine or whatever, and to sack it, you're going to be shown the door.
Would you say that was the most important album, Sergeant Pepper, of the Beatles, or is there another one that stands out more?
I think, the whole trajectory of music, starting with Please Please Me up to Revolver, was very important because if you could see what they did, they started very basic.
Mm.
And then with each album, the complexity of the music increased. And of course, the Beatle freaks will say, well, that's because they were learning and George Martin was teaching them and all of this stuff. That's not what was going on. That was the plan. The plan was to start basic and to build, so that this helped to create a rapport with the fan base as well. Wow, look at the boys. They're growing. They're evolving. They're transcending Please Please Me and With the Beatles, and here they are with Help and Rubber Soul and Revolver. So the first 7 was very important. Revolver was really the segue leading into Sgt. Pepper. They did a very interesting album after Revolver. It's called A Collection of Oldies, where it's a greatest hits album. But the oldest song on the album was only 3 years old. So how did it become a collection of oldies? It was a transition record because Paul was no longer there and Billy took over the band, but the Beatles were on the hook for 2 albums a year. So they had to release that collection of oldies as the second album in 1966 after Revolver. But then when they got to Pepper, Pepper was very, very important. It was very important.
Yeah, you cannot knock that album. As in, what I mean by that is, even if it's a bit like saying the word Jewish, you're anti-Semitic before you even get the word the H out at the end of it, and it's like with Sergeant Pepper as well. You can't say anything against that, otherwise, it's I don't know, it's just blasphemy.
And it's interesting because I loved Pepper. I loved the album cover. I remember as a kid just staring at it, because of all the colors, and that's intentional, by the way. Like I mentioned, the Pied Pipers. But when I listen to it now, it sounds dated. Now it sounds dated. Still some great music on the album, but it's dated. And then the albums after that, I don't know. Magical Mystery Tour was really Sgt. Pepper Part 2
on acid.
And then the White Album, like I said, was really the first album, I believe, where we actually hear the band as a band. That's what the Beatles sounded like.
But it weren't that definitely weren't just the Beatles, were it?
White Album?
Yeah, they had the keyboard. No,
it wasn't just them. Like I said, they were playing. Ringo, John, and George were playing more on the recorded tracks. Not all of them. Okay, but like I mentioned, I believe Donovan was doing guitar work.
Who was
on
the keyboard
Julia.
player, Mike?
That was Billy Preston from
Billy
Let
Preston,
It Be.
That's it, yeah.
But Nicky Hopkins, who was another great keyboard player, he played the keys. He played the piano on Revolution. And I brought this up, and people were like, "Well, what are you talking about? That was Paul McCartney." I'm like, "No, it's not." I mean, Nicky's passed away now. Nicky did work with the Rolling Stones. I mean, he played with everybody, and he still has a website up. And on his website, it says that he played the piano on the Beatles song "Revolution." So we have
these jigsaw pieces, don't we? In this mosaic, they're there.
There's also an interview. There's also an interview, Dom and Chris. I didn't mean to cut you off there. I'm sorry.
All right, don't worry. Crack on.
We have an interview that John did where he said that there were other people that played on our albums, on our records, but we weren't allowed to talk about it.
Oh, that's coming from a totally different angle, isn't it?
Yeah. So, and he mentioned Brian Jones from the Rolling Stones. Brian passed away in the 27 Club, but I think John was not just talking about Brian Jones. And in that interview, he also talked about his guitar playing and how it was, he was embarrassed by his guitar playing, especially when he compared it to other guitarists that came before him or who were peers of his. So in a lot of ways, he was dropping a lot of hints. I mean, in I think it was a 71 Rolling Stone interview, he said that the Beatles were a myth, McCartney was a myth, and Bob Dylan was a myth. And of course, Bob Dylan, we have that interview going back to the early 2000s with Ed Bradley on 60 Minutes, and he talks about the chief commander.
Yeah.
That's creepy, isn't it?
It's
Right?
very creepy. Yeah.
They just made a film about him, Mike. Bob Dylan. They've done a biography film style thing for him.
So is it like a Amazon type job?
Just reselling. No, it's a big film. Big
okay.
film. They're reselling the Bob Dylan myth again, aren't they? Can I just say one more thing before we go, just very quickly?
Sure.
There's a little Instagram thing circulating. I don't know if you've seen it, Mike, where Paul McCartney walks out and there's a guy who looks very much like John Lennon in the background, but like old, like now. Have you seen that?
I have seen that. So I forgot who the actor is on that. Hold on one second. Yeah, it's.
Do you think that's meant to be to trigger something?
Robert Carlyle.
Right.
Is that Robert Carlyle? Is it?
That's what I was told. Was Robert Carlyle.
Right.
I've got a screenshot of it. I'll send it to them.
They're always doing stuff like that. He's always doing stuff like that. Billy is the master of. He's the master of disguise. He's the master of pranks. His ability to constantly put it in your face and to lead people along.
Yeah.
You know, he did an interview. I don't know if you guys saw this on my channel.
I've watched more or less every one of them, so probably.
Well, where he said that he was talking about the Get Back sessions, and originally they were supposed to do 14 new songs for the Get Back sessions. He says in 30 days, but it was really 2 weeks because they were supposed to get 14 songs done in 2 weeks, then do a live show, which was going to lead to a TV special. And he said that we bit off more than we can chew, and it was, strictly speaking, quite impossible. So Billy was saying this, and he was responding to my work. That's what he was doing, because when I did my April 2020 documentary on whether they wrote their own music or not, that made its way into the memoirs of Billy Shears. And what I was told by Tom Harriet is if certain information comes out that is truthful, then he'll put it in the book. Tom will put it in the book. I mean, I don't know why it works that way, but that's what.
Wouldn't you love to know if they watched that? What they were saying when they watched that presentation?
Well, I think I think they said, well, you know, good for him. He figured it out, but nobody's going to believe him because, you know, because it's a cult.
Because they're all Muppets. Yeah.
The Beatles are a cult.
Yeah.
So it's trying to convince a cult member to drop their belief system.
Yes.
They're just not going to do it. I mean, you've got to see some of the emails I get.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah,
I can't imagine.
And Billy has an artificial eye. He's blind in his right eye, and this was discovered by a colleague of mine.
Yeah, that was a fantastic podcast. The other podcast I enjoyed as well was the lady who'd written the book about the Seattle connections. Was it Seattle? Yes.
Yes. Yes. Sharon Clemens.
That was an interesting.
Very intriguing, and I recommend that people read that book too, because that book has nothing to do with the memoirs of Billy Shears. Sharon went off and did her own thing.
Yeah,
and it's very compelling. I enjoyed the interview with her, and also the interview I did with Stacy. Stacy doesn't want me to use her last name, so we'll just say Stacy.
That's the English lady, isn't it?
No, that's Kat. Kat from Supernatural Beatles. Yeah, she does excellent work.
Yeah, she does. Yeah.
She's excellent work. But no, this is Stacy. Stacy's she's American, but she looked at Billy's family tree and traced his lineage, his ancestry back to the Douglas Hamiltons and the Percy bloodline. So the Douglas Hamiltons would be his father's side of the house, and the Percy bloodline would be his mother's side of the house. On his mother's side, there's Campbell bloodline, so that's where you would get the whole William or Billy Campbell bit of the Paul is dead conspiracy. And I think Stacy did an unbelievable job, and it's very compelling as well. And what's interesting about that particular presentation is I sent it to Tom Harriet twice, and Tom never responded, which is out of character for Tom, because if when I send him something, he will write something back. He'll respond to it. But on those two occasions, it just went dark. So maybe I'm reading into it, but Stacy's work was very compelling, and I think that probably Stacy got too close to the target. Now, in the book, Billy tells us in memoirs that clues to his father and his family are in the book. But honestly, I think that they didn't believe anybody would figure it out. But I think Stacy did. I did. So, and also, we'll wrap up with this, but going back to his eye, he confirmed the eye discovery during an interview, I think with CBS, and there was this whole exhibit called Eyes of the Storm. And these were photos that were allegedly taken by Paul McCartney back in 1964. So not only was he a bass player and a phenomenal guitar player, but he was a phenomenal photographer as well. And so there's an entire gallery now of all of these photographs. And so the interviewer, they're looking at this one particular photograph, and the interviewer is interviewing Billy. For those of you who don't know, that's Paul McCartney. And the interviewer says to Billy, "You really have to have an eye to take that picture." And so Billy looks, he looks forward, he goes, "Yes, my left one." So his left eye is his eye that has sight, and he's blind in his right eye, and he has an ocular prosthetic.
I've seen that, Mike. He does a little weird foot stamp as well when he says it, doesn't it?
Yeah, we're trying to figure that one out. I don't know what that weird. He does it with his left foot.
Yeah,
see, everything is left because it's the left-handed path.
I just got the impression that meant something. I don't know. I obviously don't know what
I know.
it means,
We're still trying to figure that out. The stamping down of his foot, but left-handed path. Heather lost her left leg.
Yeah.
Paul plays left-handed, so it's the left-handed path. That's what they're.
Yeah.
That's what it's a reference to.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Okay. Should we call it
so you guys had your show at Crazy Mike.
That was fantastic, Mike. That was absolutely brilliant. Loved it.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah, it was well worth waiting for.
Very enjoyable.
Hopefully we'll have another podcast with at some other point.
Anytime.
Yeah. Okay, then, everybody, thanks for tuning in. If you're tuning into part 2, we'll see you there. If not, we'll see you next week. Bye.